of law in jeopardy in the UAE. Welcome to the Bar Human Rights Council, a committee of England and Wales. Welcome to you both of three here, and welcome to our panelists following us online. This event will be moderated by Anissa Kasamali. Anissa, you are a barrister and a human rights lawyer, and I have the pleasure to give you the floor for the moderation of the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of those here today and to those of us joining us online as well. Thank you to the Press Club and to the Bar Human Rights Committee. The Bar Human Rights Committee is sponsoring this event, and they are the independent and international human rights arm of the Bar of England and Wales, an organisation which is dedicated to promoting principles of justice and respect for fundamental human rights through the rule of law. Just last year, in July 2023, the BHRC was officially voted into the UN's Economic and Social Council, the ECOSOC, and through this, the BHRC supports the work of ECOSOC and participates fully and formally in all UN meetings. And it's in much the same vein that we are hosting this event today. We're here in Geneva, as was said, during the UN Human Rights Council's 56th session, in order to highlight growing concerns from the UN and other international bodies about threats to the rule of law in the UAE. This is an issue on which UN Special Rapporteurs have published their concerns, and in particular, they've expressed concerns about a group of individuals called the UAE 87. And the UAE 87 is a group including Emirati activists, scholars, doctors, lawyers, many others, who have called for democratic reform in the UAE. And what's happened is that they've been tried for various terror charges by the authorities. The UN Special Rapporteurs have expressed concern about this, and in January of this year, they described the charges as a deeply regressive step. Of the charges themselves, the Special Rapporteurs said, and I quote, that the UAE must ensure that national counter-terrorism legislation does not unnecessarily or disproportionately restrict civil society and civil space and is consistent with international human rights law. The authorities have not responded meaningfully to these concerns. They've said that the allegations are premature as the proceedings are still ongoing. However, we're now in a scenario where judgment is imminent and could in fact lead to these individuals receiving potentially the death penalty or lengthy prison sentences, and we'll hear more on this from our speakers today. The purpose of today's event is to discuss these obviously very important and concerning issues in more detail, to highlight exactly how these actions might be in breach of international standards, and to call on the international community, including the UN's Human Rights Committee, to respond to these concerns and to continue monitoring the situation. And we say that this should be an item on the agenda of this 56th session. I'm with a fantastic panel of speakers today. It was already mentioned that some of them have only been able to join us online, unfortunately, due to flight cancellations. But luckily, we have them via remote means, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our panelists. Firstly, we have Louise Price, who is a barrister practicing in the UK, and she is an executive committee member of the BHRC. She has a particular interest in the international application of the right to a fair trial, and has undertaken trial observations acting as rapporteur on the application of international standards for fair trials. And she will draw on this expertise in speaking to us today. She will discuss those standards and look at reports from international organisations in order to consider how they may be being breached in the UAE. We then have with us to my left, Ahmed Al-Nuaimi, who is currently based in the UK, in fact. He is a member of the UAE 87 and has first-hand experience of the UAE authorities' distressing measures, and he will speak to us a little bit more about his personal experiences today. We have then with us via Zoom as well, Matthew Hedges. He is a British academic who was arrested in 2018 and in fact detained for almost 7 months after being falsely accused of spying for the government. He too will tell us today about his own experiences and speak to the broader security situation. And finally, we'll hear from Fala Sayed, to my left, who is a human rights officer at MENA Rights, based here in Geneva, and she will speak about the domestic legal framework in the UAE and how this operates. So without further ado, I will pass on to my first speaker, Louise.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and apologies for not being able to make it in person today due to disrupted travel. I'm very grateful to be able to join you remotely. I sit on the Executive Committee of the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales, and it's in that capacity that I'm speaking to you today. There have, as you've just heard, been a number of reports concerning the current conduct of trials within the UAE, and particularly the trial of the UAE 87. Indeed, not just the trials, but the ongoing detention and treatment of those individuals as well. As I'm sure you're going to hear more about from the other speakers, the trials concern at least 84 people who have been held or are being tried on terrorism charges under what I understand is the 2014 counter-terrorism laws that the UAE has enacted. However, the acts that are concerned stem back to the period of 2010 and 2011. Many of those being tried currently, I understand, have already been sentenced and convicted following a previous trial in 2013. You've heard from our introduction that there have been specific reports that have raised concerns about the current trial. In January of this year, a significant number of UN experts, including the relevant special rapporteurs, raised a number of specific concerns about the way the trials were being conducted. And indeed, last year in May, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention declared the detention of some of these individuals to be arbitrary. The current trial, I understand, has been going on since December 23, and we are now at the point where I understand from the reporting that I have read that sentencing is imminent in the next few days. But the focus of what I want to talk to you about is the relevant international legal standards and how they are being applied by the UAE in terms of this trial. The first concern that I wish to raise, of course, is whether or not the trials are an act of discrimination. There are individuals who are being tried for or participating in calls for democratic parliament in UAE. That raises a clear issue of discrimination and whether or not these trials and the ongoing detention of individuals is as a consequence of their political views that diverge from the official government discourse. Discrimination based on status and because of work as lawyers, human rights defenders, or indeed participation in civil society. When detention results from the active exercise of civil and political rights, there is, in my view, a strong presumption that the detention also constitutes a violation of international law on the grounds of discrimination based on political views. Certainly an argument that that is the case. And that's potentially reinforced in these circumstances by the fact that some of those who originally sentenced in 2013, I understand, have been held now past their sentence, or the end rather of their original sentence, and they've been told that they are now being held for counselling. And this, I understand, stems from under the 2014 counter-terrorism laws. The Emirati courts can order a person who is said to have adopted extremist or terrorist thought to be placed in what are called counselling centres or to be held for counselling. Turning then to the international legal standards concerning a fair trial. Well, the right to a fair trial is a well-entrenched international legal standard. The starting point, of course, could be said to be the Universal Declaration. Right to fair trial there is guaranteed by Articles 10 and Articles 11. A fair and public hearing by an impartial and independent tribunal, including, of course, guarantees for the necessary of one's defence. We also have the right to a fair trial set out, very general right set out in Article 14 of the International Convention on Political and Civil Rights. The Arab Charter also, to Article 13, guarantees the right to a fair trial. And there's a strong argument that the right to a fair trial is also part of customary international law. And yet the reports that concern the trial that's currently ongoing in the UAE suggest that there are 4, in my view, primary themes that suggest that the rights enshrined in the accepted parts of the right to a fair trial are not being upheld. The first of those is the restriction of access to case material or legal assistance. In other words, an erosion of the right to a proper defence. Secondly, a question as to judicial impartiality. Thirdly, a question of being retried for the same offence, or it's known as double jeopardy. And finally, the fact that some of the hearings conducted in secret or in private, at least in part. So turning to the first of those themes, there is a suggestion that the lawyers involved in the cases, where there are lawyers involved, who don't have access to case materials, that clearly calls into question the right, whether the right to prepare a defence is being given effect adequately. International law recognises there must be time to organise a defence without restriction. That is well established that applies pre-trial as well as during the trial for fairly obvious reasons. And of course, that's closely linked to the right to communicate with counsel or lawyers of the defendant's own choosing. The second theme is the right to an independent and competent tribunal. There's been questions raised as to whether or not the judges have been directing witnesses. There was a report specifically of witnesses being asked to prepare scripts that may not be unknown whether those scripts, who's authored them or whether they are from the witnesses originally. Of course, there is the guarantee of the separation of powers, rather that there ought to be a guarantee of the separation of powers in the Constitution as a fundamental tenet of the UN's basic principles on judicial independence. That is, of course, set out in Principle 1. The third theme is double jeopardy. The issue arises from the fact that some of these trials appear to be retrials or indeed second charges being brought on matters that have not only already been tried but have resulted in a conviction. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 14.7, quite clearly sets out the right against retrial for something you've already been convicted for. It's part of the right to a fair trial. The Arab Charter on Human Rights, Article 19, says no one may be tried twice for the same offence. So it's quite clear again that the lack of clarity, and indeed the duplication, if it is that, of charges, of course, is of concern when judged against those standards. And the final theme that I consider comes out of the reports is the conduct of the hearings and the lack of public nature of those hearings. Again, the right to a public hearing is long enshrined in many constitutions around the world, far preceding the modern international human rights treaties. It could be described as a very ancient right. In Article 14 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, everyone is entitled to a public hearing. The Arab Charter, again, at Article 13, also guarantees the right to a public hearing. And yet the reports that the Special Rapporteurs have put forward indicate that that is not happening. So you have 4, in my view, clear themes that suggest that the international standards expected in respect to fair trials are not being met, or may not be being met. And of course, the right to a fair trial is an inherent part of the upholding of the rule of law. There are also issues that I wanted to raise briefly before I end, also about the conditions of detention. That's no doubt something we will hear more of, but certainly at the very least, there's reports of long periods of solitary confinement. loud noise exposure while individuals are in detention. The UN Mandela rules, the treatment of prisoners suggest that solitary confinement should be limited to exceptional circumstances and used as a last resort for as short a time as possible, and be subject to independent review. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture in 2011 proposed that solitary confinement should be limited, not in excess of 15 days, or rather that it should be prohibited absolutely after 15 days. So it's quite clear from reading these reports and from the sense of these reports that there are a significant number of themes and issues that are coming out of these trials that do suggest the rule of law is in jeopardy. I hope that that helps provide some context in terms of the legal framework and standards that are relevant and pertinent and that should be considered when we are discussing matters today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise, for placing these concerns about the UAE's actions in that broader international legal context and identifying those key themes indicating that those standards may not be being met. And that's something that we must keep in mind both now and continue monitoring, but also once judgment is handed down. And as both I have said and Louise has said, that is expected imminently. We'll now turn to Ahmed to speak to his own experience about some of these themes and perhaps provide some human colour.
All right. Thank you very much. And I would like... Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales. Hearing from Louise, thanks for her to give us these words, which show that the people around us actually who they really care about the human rights in the Middle East and in my country, especially the United Arab Emirates. Now, in December 7th, the first hearing of the trial of the 87th Emirati, they are before the Abu Dhabi Federal Court began on charging them, and they actually were shocked because before they went to the trial, they did not know anything about the issue and why they are in the trial, and what is the new issue that the government or the authorities they brought for them. At that time and that day, all of us heard about it. And to let you know what is in the ground, some of the families, they did not know anything about this trial, this new trial. And the other family told them that we attended the first trial and the first hearing in the court. Then they could actually reach and find out what is happening for their relative in the prison. What is the issue and what is the problem? I think Louise covered many of that, but to understand it, that the new one is related for the old one, and this is against the law, against everything, against all the principles of the law in the United Arab Emirates and in the world as well. It's not only in the United Arab Emirates. What was that? It is actually about establishing a committee in 2010. In 2010, this committee is about the dignity and the dignity and justice. This is a committee. They established it with other people, even not only the group of Islah group, the reform group. No, it is with other people in the United Arab Emirates. And it calls for the rights, that same thing. It is calling for democracy and for the freedom of speech in the United Arab Emirates, not more than that. And they call that a terrorist Act. And as they established a new law in the United Arab Emirates, that was in 2014, it says that any act, any terrorist act, any establishing of any new committee, it is as it leads for the terrorist law in the United Arab Emirates, which lead the people to be in the death penalty or permitted staying in jail. It is very obvious that the United Arab Emirates authorities, they don't want to release those people. They don't want to release the people who call for democracy. And this is the reason why they established first the advice center, and we saw them that they extend staying for the prisoners more and more every year. They do that, and they did not release any one of them. Now they are actually trying to do something new, to do that like an authority for them, to show that they do that legally. But what is the problem with the legal that they use? First question here, can a person be legally prosecuted twice for the same incidents? In the Emirates law, it can't be at all. And even in the world law, anywhere you go, you can't prosecute anyone for the same problem twice. And it was only a minor, actually. It was a minor. It was a committee from the first case. And if you go to the first case, you're going to read it there. It was there. And all the people were charged because of that. How can you do that? So legally, they can't do that. And the quick answer, and very simple answer, it is not only illegal, but that also destroy the most important principle of a criminal law around the world. Because no one is safe now. No one who go there is safe. He can be charged for something that he was charged before, and they increase the punishment after that. So in Article 27 in the United Arab Emirates law said that the law defines crimes and penalties, and there is no penalty for what was done or left before the law providing for it was issued. So that means if we know about the story of those people, they were in jail in 2012. And this law came in 2014. So how can you go back? How can you go back and charge them for that? Let me say another problem with that. Another problem with that all of those people, they finish their sentences. They finish their sentences. And what is showing us today from the authority of the United Arab Emirates, that they don't respect even what they say, the sentences, which comes from the federal court. How can the government or the security department exactly do not respect the judge who give that sentences? So as we see, There are many problems with that, and they give a reason for that. But unfortunately, as we know, when the human rights activists and centers, they sent them, asking them for an answer, they said the issue is in a process. It is in the trial. How can go to the trial illegally? This is the question. And how far you are go for? So is there any answer from the United Arab Emirates government? There is no answer. And they don't respect the law, and they don't respect the human right, and the violence against the prisoners. It's actually increased more and more. And we have to go back a little bit about those people who are in trial today. They had been in hidden prison where we didn't know where were they before the trial for 7 months, some of them more than that, some of them 2 years. And no one knew where they were. They could not even call their parents, their relative, their wives. They could not be in contact with their lawyers. As you know, the lawyers came to the trial without having the case. There is no case file. How can the lawyer do their job? Even that they know they are innocent, they tried their best, I think. But the problem today is that we are facing that the authority destroying the principle of justice and destroying the law of the United Arab Emirates, which is very dangerous for the community, for the United Arab Emirates, and for the world. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope that I cover the important thing about what is happening there today.
And thank you very much, Ahmed, for those words. They really just highlight the personal impact on those who are affected, and indeed the impact on their families as well. And thank you also for providing the context to some of the legal themes which Louise mentioned, such as double jeopardy, for example. I'd now like to turn to Matthew Hedges. Louise spoke earlier about the conditions of detention and made some broad comments on that. And I turn to Matthew to discuss his own personal experiences of that, and indeed to speak about the broader security situation at the moment.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. And like Louise, I want to apologize for not being able to attend in person. As we said, we had our flight cancelled. So before I did speak about my personal experience and the broader issues of security, say in the UAE, I did want to just build on what Ahmed said about the deterioration of the rule of law. The rule of law has been publicly abused, has been publicly shown to be nothing but a tool of the system itself. And this is that there have been prominent examples, such as Sheikh Isa bin Zayed, who was filmed torturing a man in the desert, and the court found him innocent of these acts because he had an alleged reaction to his medication. This was while policemen in uniform were standing around him and were contributing to this torture. Nonetheless, even faced with evidence, there's one rule for them and one rule for us. There have been other more prominent examples, say, with regards to the 1MDB affair and some of the connections to persons within the UAE. But obviously now it's becoming much more of a mass repressive tool that's that's akin and very similar to events in Russia, where these are nothing but show trials, and they're show trials to demonstrate the power that the state has and how it can easily legitimize it. And then that comes to my experience and conditions of the prisons. I was extremely lucky to have simply to have followed a route whereby I simply said whatever my captors wanted me to say, whatever they wanted me to agree to. If I hadn't, I was made abundantly clear what and where I would go. I would be taken to a villa. This is one of the common facilities where they hold people in an interrogation phase in forms of an initial period, which are they look like normal houses, and they have the windows boarded in, and there is a chair, simply a chair where you are tied to, with bright lights to stop you from sleeping, as well as loud music and physical abuse from the state security personnel. I also heard this firsthand from someone I did meet in prison, who had been tied to a chair and a bag over his head for a year. And yet he was still able to move to another prison later. If this is just the tip of the iceberg for some, what happens to others? What has happened to those people that have died in custody in the UAE, which has happened on several occasions. So with myself being held by state security, I was told that they could hold me for 6 months before they would have to go to court, at which point they could also just extend it for another 6 months. And this could endlessly go on. I was threatened with rendition to overseas military bases that the UAE operates, most namely in Eritrea or in Yemen. I was threatened with physical abuse. I was threatened with physical abuse against my family. Meanwhile, I could see and hear it occurring in the same facility I was in. So I was made abundantly clear that this would happen to me. They forced me to take cocktails of medication, which both elevated my mental state, but also depressed my mental state so that I was more subdued. This was all occurring in a police building, but the exact area was actually operated by state security. This is something which Fala on the panel has spoken about in the past, but that within the Ministry of Interior, the state security that's where the state security is positioned, but they have a sovereign ability to overrule anything else. But this is the abuse, and everything that's happening is still under the authority of the Ministry of Interior. And that means any uniformed officers, any of its senior leadership, such as the Inspector General of the UAE's Minister of Interior, which is Nasser Ahmed al-Raisi, he's in fact also the president of Interpol. The responsibility lies on these individuals who have that command responsibility and oversight of everything that happens to two persons. And I say that both as a witness, as someone who's experienced it, but also as an academic who specializes on authoritarian regimes and their repressive tactics. My PhD was written about the UAE state security. The fact that even in this kangaroo court that I was put through, I was still able to have one of the charges overturned, and the charge was handling secretive information. But I made it abundantly clear that this wasn't the case. I didn't have anything of secretive information. So what happened a week after I was released, they redefined the definition of secretive and confidential information to include anything, quite literally anything that was publicly available but could be interpreted as confidential. I've seen and I've observed the growing influence of the security regime, of the state security within the UAE, that it is now an overbearing aura. It is a society within the society that controls and influences people's behaviors and actions, and it has now become so strong that not only does it limit the ability for Emiratis or foreign nationals to attend a certain educational course, to travel, to work, to meet, to have any degree of a free life, but they have now successfully been able to limit the cognitive abilities and the cognitive process within people's minds. I saw this even with my interrogators, but I am well aware of its impact now, whereby you can see people's thought processes taking place. You can see the gears in their head turning, but they are now so afraid that they have to make themselves say something different, to act in a different way against their own innate wishes, and this really is a sign of the extent of repression within the UAE and the danger that this now presents. Thank you all for listening to that, and I'll pass it across to Fala now.
And our sincere thanks to you, Matthew, for sharing your experiences. This only assists with raising attention to this issue, ensuring the international community keeps monitoring it and gives it the consideration that it urgently requires. Turning now to Fala, a number of our speakers today have spoken about the domestic legal framework in the UAE, and we've heard references to, for example, the 2014 counterterrorism law. So I'll turn now to Fala to provide some further detail on the domestic legal context.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you to the Human Rights Bar, to the Human Rights Committee at the bar in England and Wales for inviting us, and for the panelists. I think it's going to be a bit hard to, take the floor after two moving testimonies. So thank you so much for this. Yeah, of course, and I'd be happy to speak about the legal framework. Maybe one thing before we jump into this, just to remind our audience that, the UAE is a place where there is no civic space. There is no civil society. It's too dangerous to be there. Everyone who speaks about the UAE, who criticizes the UAE, is forced into exile, and that is a reality in the UAE, and it's one of the reasons why we are here in Geneva and not elsewhere. And of course, the main reason for that is that there is absolutely, a massive crackdown on freedom of expression and on public dissent in the UAE. And one of the ways that the authorities are able to crack down that massively is by, using the legal framework. And we can see that in the UAE and in the Gulf in general as well, you know, the legal framework itself gives the space and enables the authorities to repress fundamental freedoms. And even UN special procedures mandate holders, you know, have issued communications about problematic laws in the UAE. And here I want to focus, as you said, on the 2014 counterterrorism law, upon which, you know, the Special Rapporteur on counterterrorism has issued a communication to UAE authorities in 2020. And the Special Rapporteur notably found that the UAE counterterrorism legislation is not fully compliant, or is not at all compliant, actually, with international human rights law. And the main legal standards against which the counterterrorism law was examined in this communication are the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Namely, you know, the right to liberty, the prohibition of torture, arbitrary detention, and the principle of legal certainty. I think the most important thing that was found in this communication by the Special Rapporteur is about the definition of terrorism, and, you know, how problematic it was, and how it is definitely not in accordance with human rights law standards. This is mainly because the definition of terrorism is too broad in the counterterrorism law, and we can find this in Article 1. The Special Rapporteur, he says that we are concerned by the imprecise, ambiguous, and uncertain scope of these terms, which essentially remain undefined. In this law, a terrorist act is basically any act that is committed with a terrorist purpose or result. And, you know, obviously this latter phrasing is not defined, and any act of public dissent can be conflated with terrorism, or can be understood as having been committed with a terrorist purpose or result. And such vague and overbroad definition will definitely allow the authorities to conflate, you know, public criticism with terrorism. And what is important to highlight in this context is that although, you know, there is no agreement, no international agreement or a multilateral treaty on what terrorism means, countries should nonetheless ensure that counterterrorism legislations at least, you know, are at least defined with specific conducts, which is here not the case in the 2014 counterterrorism law. And another important point that should be highlighted in this communication is also the definition of terrorist organization. The Special Rapporteur considered that the definition of that term, and especially, you know, the membership to a terrorist organization, lacks clarity and is therefore subject to, subject to subjective interpretation. And the risk here is that individuals may be unlawfully charged and sentenced to belonging to a terrorist organization, which is actually the cornerstone, actually, of the UAE 84 trial and the UAE 94 trial. Yeah, I mean, all in all, this lack of clarity just increases the chances, basically, of the counterterrorism legislation to be misused to repress fundamental freedoms. Another thing that the Special Rapporteur has highlighted, and that Louise has very quickly touched upon, is the use or the misuse, actually, of munasaha centers. The counterterrorism law provides, you know, a legal basis for the detention of individuals beyond the completion of their sentence. And this is done under the pretext of rehabilitation. The exact definition of munasaha centers are administrative units aiming at the enlightenment and reform of persons deemed to pose a terrorist threat, or those convicted of terrorist offenses. And this law basically does not require that the detention in these centers have a certain duration. Therefore, you know, there's a clear risk that these centers will be used to simply incarcerate individuals indefinitely, and that, you know, we can renew their detention indefinitely. And that's actually, this has been the case, you know, in relation to many individuals who are prosecuted during the UAE 94 cases. Also, Matthew touched upon it very little bit, which is the state security apparatus, and he's the one who wrote the book about it. So I usually try to touch upon it, but with a lot of humility. And yeah, I mean, the main authority that applies this legal framework is the state security apparatus. It's the main entity that's in the UAE that is meant to deal with terrorism and state security issues. And in 2003, the state security apparatus founding law was replaced with a new law that basically expanded its powers and responsibility, and it allowed it to operate without any judicial, financial, any governmental oversight. There's basically no oversight on how it operates. And this state security apparatus has actually been responsible for widespread and systematic human rights violations in the UAE, including, as Ahmed said, enforced disappearances, torture, arbitrary detention. And the SSA, as we call it, it was notably responsible for the arrest of the UAE 94. Very quickly, you know, just to mention someone such as Ahmed Mansour, who is an award-winning human rights defender, was arrested in 2017 from his home and disappeared by members of the state security apparatus. Even, you know, Matthew, as he said, he was arrested and subjected to acts of torture by state security apparatus agents throughout his custody. Currently, I think EDAC, the Emirates Detainee Advocacy Center, has issued that there are over 60 prisoners of conscience who are arbitrarily detained by the state security apparatus, and nearly all of them are being detained beyond the completion of their sentence, and many of them are denied any contact with their families and lawyers. One very last thing, I don't know if I have still time, but yeah, the state security apparatus, you know, operates on the basis of a law that has actually never been made public, which is a clear, you know, violation of the principle of legality. And there has been a leaked draft which was, you know, leaked by the Emirates Detainee Advocacy Center, where, you know, it was found that the state security apparatus is just given very broad power to gather and analyze information on, and I quote here, any political activity and monitor social phenomena, which is, you know, quite concerning when we see these kinds of wordings in a law. And the president of the state security apparatus also has the power to place suspects in custody up to 3 months and take any decision that is binding on all other security apparatuses. The state security apparatus is also allowed to establish security offices in any federal ministry, government office, embassy, or consulate. And we can see that such broad and unconstrained powers could result in the violation of international human rights law, and, you know, allows authority basically to act without any judicial oversight. I don't know if I have time to touch upon the UAE 94 and 84 cases a little bit.
Perhaps a minute or two. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, I mean, as was talked about before, and I think Louise already said that there was an opinion that was issued actually following the arrest of the UAE 94, where the working group has considered that their detention was arbitrary. Now we see that the UAE 94 is just being continued throughout this new trial, which is the UAE 84. And most of them, or nearly all of them, are being charged with with terrorist crimes, and on the basis of the counterterrorism legal framework that I've talked about right before. And in January 2024, actually, there have been 9 UN experts who have expressed their alarm at these new spurious terrorism charges which were brought against these individuals in the UAE 84. We are waiting for a verdict on July 10, most probably. So we are just hoping for the best, and we are hoping that this verdict will not take place in a media blackout, just like this whole trial has been.
Thank you very much, Fala, for that insightful and very detailed assessment of the UAE's domestic legal framework. And thank you indeed to all of our speakers for setting that in context. Between all of our speakers, we've heard about the domestic legal framework which underpins what's going on in the UAE and the threats to the rule of law. We've heard then about how what is happening in the UAE may well be in breach of international standards, and then sort of putting their personal experiences in that context. We've had Matthew and Ahmed telling us about how they have suffered as a result of that domestic framework, and indeed a framework which arguably doesn't meet international legal standards. So I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to all of our speakers today, and I'm sure that those in the room and those listening online will echo that thanks. I'd now like to open the floor for any questions that anybody might have, both in the room and online, for any of our speakers. And perhaps when you ask a question, if there is a particular individual in mind for whom you'd like to direct it, then do let us know. The questions can be there is a chat online, so if you perhaps do not want to sort of say your question, do feel free to type it, and I will sort of give it to the relevant speaker. But whilst everyone is thinking of, I'm sure, their burning questions, I have a question for Fala, in fact, which is, we've heard a lot about the domestic framework and how it affects individuals who are based in the UAE, both British and indeed British citizens and indeed citizens of other nations as well as UAE citizens. How now can the international community safely assist those who are affected by these issues?
Yeah, I think first of all, especially in relation to these trials that have been happening in the UAE, and especially in relation to the UAE 84 trial, I think it's important for all of us here to push for the monitoring of trials, to push for just allow people to see whether these trials actually, uphold the standards of fair trial. If these trials are being held in secret, which is, always the case, there is a higher risk that these trials will not meet fair trial standards, and that these victims will be subjected to torture. So I think a way to support those who are currently detained is to monitor their trial, to always ask for their whereabouts, just be able to just be there, to ask about their fate and whereabouts, and the disclosure of their fate and whereabouts, most importantly.
And I think that probably ties into sort of the international community continuing to monitor it, UNHRC sort of continuing to consider it as part of the agenda and keeping the issue live through discussions such as these, but also sort of through other forums as well, both NGOs and multilateral agencies.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially, monitor, not only monitor, but also, participate in these international forums. The UPR of the UAE the UPR of the UAE underwent, a few months ago. So I think it's important to use these forums, whether for international NGOs or for victims as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question here. So, microphone.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you very much for your presence and your presentation. I really appreciate. But I have only one question, because I hear you that you said detentions and they are in prison and very bad conditions, and I don't know how it could be possible, because the Red Crescent Emirate Society exists. And anything can happen in your own country. If there is anybody have an accident, car accident, he found himself inside the jail, his family can support him. Other he can't, and they cannot be in jail for a long time. If there is possibility for visiting, there is possibility yes, the Red Crescent Emirate Society exists. They're offering support, kind of support for neighborhood country, neighborhood Gulf, including Perth. They are offering support in the international level, Red Cross movement. But I don't know if you can answer to my question. If the Red Crescent Emirate Society are able to do something, or they didn't do what they have to do in your own country. Otherwise, the law in Jeopardy in UAE, yes, I can defend my own law as Emirate citizen. I can defend my rights until have been expired. There is expiration. Then I can come in the United Nations in Geneva for human rights or any other commission. Mr. Ahmed, can you reply to my question, or somebody else can reply?
Thank you for raising up this question, which is very important, actually. Let me say why those people are in jail now, why they are detainees. Because they call for their rights. This is the problem. And we can agree, the United Arab Emirates Authority and the government is not a democracy, government. And this is actually, it is fact. It is not a theory. It is a fact. It's not elected. There is no democratic system in the United Arab Emirates. So you have no voice as a citizen. Okay? If you agree with the government, there is no problem at all. Okay? And this is a political problem. It's not car crash or something, a tiny thing in the life. When you touch anything politic in the United Arab Emirates, you will be punished. This is the fact, and that's what we faced. Do the citizen people in the United Arab Emirates surrounded for that and they did not do anything? No, they did. The petition, which was in 2011, which called the March petition, it wasn't the first one. In the 80s, that the petition came from a committee, which is a very important committee in the United Arab, which is called Al-Majlis Al-Watani. This committee, actually, they called for democracy at that time. Sorry? This is the committee of it's like a parliament, but it's not a real parliament. It's not elected. They choose the people. Some of those people actually came together and say, we want to be elected. To be realistic, this is a parliament which represents the people of the United Arab Emirates. They refused to be, it's like a fake one. So they call for that. And it was refused, but there was no punishment at that time. With Sheikh Zayed time, there was no punishment like that. But nowadays, no. You will be punished even with one tweet. With one tweet, like Nasser bin Ghaith, let me give you an example for that. Nasser bin Ghaith is an academic person who is lecturer in Sorbonne University in Abu Dhabi. Why did they send him for 10 years sentence? For one tweet. Just only one tweet. And what was that tweet about? It was about the dictatorial government in Egypt, because they are their friends. So they sent him like that. So we can understand there's no freedom of speech. So what about the people of the United Arab Emirates? They used to say, they used to do something, but after this big punishment with these people, and they give an example how they will act with the people who speak loudly about their rights. So we are the example. Some of us outside, I could not go to the United Arab Emirates, and some of us are detained today. So this is my answer for that.
I can tell you that, for example, if somebody here in Geneva, he's registered in Geneva University, and something happened to him somewhere, everybody, we can support him. So you just tell me that somebody is registered in Sorbonne University, which is located in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, isn't it? And Sorbonne University, whether the headquarters in Paris or the office in Emirates, didn't do anything, which means it is something cannot be acceptable, because normally this institution, it is scientific institution for studies, and they're not really for business. Then if there is somebody have been he is registered and they didn't react didn't make any reactions, it's not credibility for this institution. It could be like that in Geneva University, everywhere in Paris, in Sorbonne University. So at least a reaction for that. Yes.
Yeah. Let me say the fact. What is the fact? Many of the institution actually they worked hard to release the academic people, because you don't know about the people maybe. They are academic, they are doctors in the universities, most of them, and they are human rights activists. So all the organization, I mean the human rights organization, work for that and call the United Arab Emirates Authority, but the United Arab Emirates Authority feel that they have the power. And as you see, Matthew gave us an example, okay? And he was doing a research. Matthew is a good example, and his government, as I know, I don't want to talk beside him, but his government was searching for him to know where he was, and they did not actually, even the government did not give the government, the UK government, an answer for that. So we have many examples that show that the United Arab Emirates Authority disrespects all those institutes, or the governments, even the UN as well, and the Parliament, the Europe Parliament as well. They disrespect them, and you can go through Google and find out how many messages go to them, and they don't even respond.
Thank you to the both of you. We have a number of questions online on the chat, so I'll read those out. The first is directed primarily to Louise, and the question is, the discussion today raised the UAE's international legal obligations and violations to the right to a fair trial and other fundamental issues which are systematic and continuing. What can the international community, including other states, international organizations, and civil society, do to hold the UAE to its international legal obligations? What legal tools under international law are available? And what other ways can the situation be raised to create awareness and see change? So I'll pass first to Louise.
Well, I think from a legal perspective, that's actually a very difficult question in some respects. What could be done legally through legal tribunals? Because I think at this stage, the action perhaps is more a question for a political question. I don't know if any of the speakers want to say anything particularly about that. And I know we've obviously already heard to some degree as to what could be done from a political or civil society perspective. Certainly in respect of trial monitoring, which obviously we've heard about already, is something that could be done, calling for trial monitoring. But certainly in terms of holding to legal account at this stage, I think that there are some real challenges in that area.
I'll turn now to Fala as well.
Yeah, I can add very quickly that, as Luis said, it's very hard, legally to hold accountable. But when we speak about accountability, we should also think about universal jurisdiction and the fact that, Emiratis and Emirati responsible and high officials who have committed crimes do come regularly to Europe. And that there might be a possibility for universal jurisdiction, which might be a bit hard, but still. I think it's an avenue that that should be explored, but yeah.
Thank you. And we have then a related question which goes more to the domestic remedies. So again, I'll direct this to Fala in the first instance. And the question is, if the UAE 84 are convicted on the 10th of July, so imminently, what recourse will the defendants have to challenge that ruling? What might then happen to the defendants? What concerns do you have? I think we have touched on some of that, but
yeah, I think the biggest concern and the one thing that we should keep in mind is that there is absolutely no independence of the judiciary in the UAE. Although they will have a right to appeal, the appeal, the judges are basically nominated by by the supreme leader, basically. So there is absolutely no independence of the judiciary, and just looking at that makes everything more difficult, and any right to appeal will just merely be artificial. Unfortunately, it's a bit pessimistic, but that's the reality. I don't know if anyone wants to add something else.
Ahmed, did you have any further comments on that? I think on that note, that only serves to underscore and highlight the role of the international community. And we've heard from Louise about the sort of legal limitations on that, but ultimately events like these and sort of really ensuring that the issue stays in the public consciousness, stays on the UN's radar, stays on the radar of international organizations through the tireless work of organizations such as MENA Rights and others, is really a key mechanism available to us by which we can continue to ensure, or at least seek to ensure, that the issue remains live. On that, perhaps, as Fala says, somewhat pessimistic but ultimately still hopeful note, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers. We are running out of time. We still do have some questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time today. I'd like to thank, as I've just said, all of our speakers for their professional and personal insights, for taking the time today to share those insights and to share their expertise and to help set out a way forward for what we can do now and what we can continue to do given the imminence of the judgment in just a few days' time and next steps for the international community. So thank you again to everybody who's taken the time to participate in this event and who's taken the time to listen and sort of attend today. It's attendance which makes events like these ultimately worthwhile and ensure that they can continue to have a positive impact. So again, my sincere thanks to all involved.